Have you ever been judged by your appearance? Have you ever felt the weight of prejudice in a place where you should be treated with respect? This story will move you. Imagine walking into a luxury dealership just to fulfill a dream and being treated like someone invisible, as if you weren't worthy of being there. That's exactly what happened to a simple man. But no one knew he was Snoop Dogg. Get ready, because what seemed like just another ordinary day turned into a true lesson in poetic justice. Do you believe that karma really attacks? So stay until the end, because what happened in this store will leave you speechless, while an arrogant salesman judged by appearance, treating him with disdain and humiliation. Something unbelievable was about to happen. The turnaround you are about to witness is proof that the greatest lessons come when we least expect it. If you think you've seen it all, wait until you discover how fate turns and turns pride into regret. Who has never experienced an unfair situation and wanted the truth to come out? In this case, the truth not only came, it brought a poetic revenge so shocking that no one in the store could forget it. Now tell me, how would you react if you were humiliated in public, treated as if you were invisible? Would you run away, fight back, or show who you really are? This is the story of a man who chose the best possible way to turn things around. What happened next proved that sometimes looks can be deceiving, and how be careful who you underestimate, because in the end, the greatest lesson is not for those who suffered, but for those who committed the injustice. Are you ready to find out how this ordinary day ended in a completely unexpected way? So hold on tight, because this is one of those stories that will make you reflect. Respect is a luxury we can all afford. It was a sunny morning in the city, and Grand Motors shone like a rare jewel in the heart of the region's most luxurious area. The dealership was known for its exclusivity and the most desired cars in the world. True dream machines, with impeccable designs and prices so high that only a select group of millionaires could even think about buying them. Inside the store, the scenery was worthy of a movie. The attendants were impeccably dressed, each wearing tailored suits with practiced smiles that hid an appraising look. Outside, the giant windows allowed everyone who passed by to admire the lines of the cars on display, but the cold and selective environment made it clear this was not a store for everyone. The air smelled of new leather and luxurious polish. Every detail of the space seemed carefully designed to exude exclusivity. Strategically placed lights highlighted the car's impeccable shine, while soft music filled the room, creating an almost intimidating atmosphere. Regulars came and went, many of them carrying expensive accessories, watches that shined as brightly as the vehicles themselves, designer handbags and perfumes that announced their arrival before they even opened their mouths. Everything about that place screamed wealth, status, and power. And then the main door opened. A man entered wearing simple clothes, worn jeans, a grey sweatshirt, and sneakers that looked like they had seen better days. He looked around, admiring the cars with a curious but calm gaze. His posture was carefree, but it also carried something more. A silent confidence, as if he already knew exactly what he wanted. That man was none other than Snoop Dogg. But at that moment, no one in the store had any idea who he really was. The staring started immediately. Some attendants exchanged ironic smiles with each other, while others made a point of completely ignoring his presence. Carlos, the most experienced salesperson and also the most arrogant on the team, was the first to approach, but not with the intention of helping. He was known for sizing up his clients in seconds, based solely on their clothes, their expressions, and most of all, their appearance. To him, that man who had just entered seemed to be in the wrong place. "Can I help you?" Carlos said, with a forcedly polite tone, but full of contempt. It was a rhetorical question, and his body language made it clear that he had already decided that this client was not worth the effort. Snoop Dogg, however, remained calm. He showed no sign of discomfort or irritation. "I'm interested in that model over there," he replied, pointing to the most expensive car in the store, a sports car that looked like a work of art on wheels. Carlos let out a muffled laugh, He had dealt with situations like this before. People coming in just to look, dream, maybe take a photo, but without any real intention of buying. Ah, that one over there. Carlos began, leaning a little to the side as if trying to hide the car with his own body. It's an incredible machine, but perhaps I can show you something more affordable. His tone was condescending, almost insulting, but Snoop remained calm, watching the salesman's every move with a neutral expression. No, I want that one. I'd like to test it, he said, without changing his tone of voice. The request was received with a look of skepticism, and soon after a mocking smile. I'm sorry, but we only release test drives to qualified customers. You understand, don't you? Meanwhile, other employees watched the interaction from afar, some even laughing discreetly. The scene began to attract the attention of customers in the store, but no one intervened. After all, who would question Carlos? He was Grand Motor's best salesman, known for closing million-dollar deals in a matter of minutes. But that morning, he had no idea he was about to make one of the biggest mistakes of his career. Silence in the store began to become uncomfortable. The sophisticated environment suddenly seemed full of tension. Carlos continued to insist that perhaps Snoop Dogg would be better off looking at simpler models, while the rapper just listened, standing firm. I just want to know the price, Snoop finally responded. What if I decide to buy it right now? The question sounded like a challenge, but Carlos didn't back down. He leaned forward, almost as if he wanted to whisper, but his voice was loud enough for everyone around him to hear. Look, these things have a price that might not be within your reach. It was at that moment that something changed in the air. Everyone in the store knew the salesman had gone too far, but no one expected what came next. And this is exactly where the story begins to take a surprising turn. Because while Carlos continued to underestimate Snoop Dogg, unaware that he was talking to one of the greatest living legends, something was about to happen that would change everything. A detail that no one in that store was prepared to face. Now let me ask you, what do you think happened next? Because what seemed like just another case of arrogance and being judged by appearance soon turned into a moment of true upheaval. And now, tell me, what would you do in this situation? If you were in Snoop Dogg's shoes, how would you react to being treated with so much disdain and arrogance? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment here, because we really want to hear your story. This space is yours to share, vent, and who knows, help other people reflect on the importance of respect and empathy. Here at the channel, we value stories that teach us valuable lessons. Poetic justice is one of those lessons, a reminder that the world turns and that underestimating someone can be the biggest mistake a person can make. We believe that by bringing these stories, we can inspire change and reinforce that respect is essential in any situation. If this story made you reflect or awakened emotions in you, leave a like right now. Your support makes all the difference so that we can continue to bring impactful stories like this. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell, because we have many more incredible stories to share. This way, you will be the first to know when we publish the continuation of this plot that has just begun. By the way, can you imagine what happened next? Snoop Dogg had an ace up his sleeve that no one expected, and the outcome of this story is so surprising that you'll want to watch until the end. But what happened when he finally revealed who he was? How did arrogant Carlos react when he realized he had made the biggest mistake of his life? Don't miss the next chapter of this electrifying story, where the twist happens and the lesson is learned the hard way. Are you curious? So get ready, because what comes next will completely change the way you see this story. Until then, leave your comment and share this video with friends. Who knows, maybe this story might inspire someone to think twice before judging based on appearance. While the Grand Motor's environment was dominated by looks of luxury and opulence, Snoop Dogg's entrance seemed to clash with everything around him. He was there calmly, almost imperceptibly. He was wearing simple clothes, slightly faded jeans, an unmarked grey sweatshirt, and sneakers that showed signs of wear. A cap pulled forward partially hid his face, which was clearly intentional. He didn't want to be recognized, much less treated in a special way by anyone who knew of his fame or fortune. At that moment, he was just an ordinary man. Snoop Dogg didn't need attention, much less approval. He had just one goal: to buy a car he had been wanting for a long time. However, its simple appearance was almost like an experiment. He knew that being judged by appearances was something that happened every day, but experiencing it in person could be eye-opening, or in this case, challenging. The expression on Snoop's face was serene, without any sign of nervousness or arrogance. He was there to fulfill a goal, but his humility seemed to bother the people around him. The way he walked around the dealership showed confidence, but not the confidence of someone who wanted to prove something to others. It was an inner confidence, a feeling that he didn't need approval to know who he really was. He looked at the cars carefully, analyzing every detail, but without that attitude that is normally expected from someone ready to buy such an expensive vehicle. Snoop didn't gesture exaggeratedly. He didn't ask dramatic questions. He just stood there calmly, like anyone who simply appreciates a good machine. The problem, however, was that the Grand Motors attendants did not see this as a show of humility. To them, it was as if he was in the wrong place. After all, how could someone with that look even think about buying one of the most expensive cars in the store? It was obvious, in their prejudiced view, that he was unable to be there for a real reason. That mentality, where appearance dictates treatment, was visible in the looks exchanged between salespeople. Small, muffled laughs, glances from the corner of the eye, and even whispers began to circulate around the room. But Snoop Dogg didn't react. He didn't mind the sneers or the appraising looks. In fact, he seemed almost amused by the situation. For him, that scenario was a clear reflection of a larger problem: deep-rooted prejudice. It was as if he was waiting for the outcome to happen, already anticipating the lesson that would be taught that day. He stopped in front of one of the most striking cars in the store, a sports car with an impeccable design, with aggressive lines and a shine that reflected the dealership's lights. There, at that moment, the real test began. The salespeople kept their distance, as if they were waiting to see what he would do. That simple and humble man, standing in front of a car that cost more than many houses, seemed to be a challenge to their ego. Snoop tilted his head slightly, analyzing the vehicle as the whispers increased. He looked around, looking for a vendor, but no one seemed interested in serving him. That was when Carlos decided to get closer, but not because he wanted to help, but because, for him, it was almost a game. "Beautiful, isn't it?" said Carlos with a smile that seemed more mocking than friendly. He looked at Snoop as if he were evaluating every detail of his clothes, looking for any sign that this man might be a real customer. But Snoop just nodded, still calmly. "Yes, it's a beautiful car. I want to know more about it." His voice was firm but not aggressive. He spoke calmly, without showing any reaction to Carlos's tone. The salesperson, on the other hand, seemed to have already decided that this interaction would be a waste of time. He let out a discreet, almost mocking laugh before responding, "Well, this one is the most expensive model we have. Maybe I can show you something more affordable." This sentence, said with a condescending tone, seemed to carry complete judgment. For Carlos, that man had no chance of buying something so valuable. But Snoop maintained his stance. Without flinching, he asked, "Price is an issue for whom?" Carlos was speechless for a moment, but his expression said it all. He didn't think that man had any idea how much the car cost. "Look, to be honest, maybe you're in the wrong place. This kind of car is for people who can actually afford it, you know? It's an investment. Serious." Can you imagine what Snoop was thinking at that moment? He, a living legend, one of the most successful artists in the world, was being treated as if he were invisible, or worse, as someone unworthy of being in that place. But still, he didn't lose his composure. He just smiled slightly, as if he was waiting for Carlos's next move, already knowing that the outcome would be unforgettable. "Now tell me, what do you think will happen next? If you were in Snoop's shoes, how would you react to a situation like this? Will Carlos continue to insist on his mistake? Or will he be able to realize who is in front of him before it is too late?" Write your impressions in the comments and use the phrase, "Respect is true luxury." We really want to know what you think, because the next step in this story is about to really surprise you. Carlos was the type of salesman who believed he had a clinical eye to identify who was a potential customer and who, in his view, was just there to waste his time. He prided himself on being one of Grand Motor's best salesmen, and his confidence often bordered on arrogance. Wearing an impeccable suit, with his hair meticulously combed and a branded watch shining on his wrist, Carlos made a point of showing off his prominent position in the store. For him, his image was as important as the cars he sold, and that same image dictated how he treated people. When he saw Snoop Dogg walk through the door, Carlos didn't need a second glance to judge. Another curious person with no money. That was the quick and cruel reading he made, and his posture said it all. He was determined not to take this man seriously. In fact, Carlos had already made his silent assessment. The simple sweatshirt, the faded jeans, the worn sneakers for him, that was almost an insult in a place where the starting price of any car exceeded 6 figures. While Snoop Dogg calmly observed the cars, Carlos remained at a distance, casting glances from the corner of his eye and laughing softly with the other attendants. "He knows these cars aren't for him, right?" Carlos commented in a low tone, eliciting muffled laughs from his colleagues. Every word seemed to carry an extra dose of contempt, and this only fueled his feeling of superiority. After all, in Carlos's mind, he was the guardian of that luxury store, someone who had the responsibility of protecting that space from people he deemed unworthy of being there. When Snoop finally pointed out the most expensive car in the store, the sports car that shined under the perfect lights, Carlos felt it was time to act, not because he wanted to help, but because he was eager to strengthen his position. He walked towards Snoop with calculated steps, maintaining an expression that was a mixture of boredom and impatience. Before even hearing what the customer had to say, Carlos was ready to discourage him. "This one is one of the most exclusive models we have," he said, as he crossed his arms and flashed a condescending smile. "You know, not just anyone can take a machine like that home." His voice was polite, but the tone was clearly that of someone who underestimated the client before him. Carlos made a point of emphasizing each word, as if he were marking an invisible line that separated those who could and those who could not even dream of buying that car. Snoop remained calm. Without changing his serene expression, he simply replied, "That's exactly why I'm interested in him." Carlos frowned for a moment, but quickly recovered his posture, laughing lightly. "Interested, of course. But hey, maybe you'd prefer to take a look at other models, something more, affordable. I'm sure we have something that would suit you better." The contempt in Carlos's words was impossible to ignore. Each sentence was loaded with prejudice, as if he was doing a favor by guiding Snoop towards what he thought was that man's limits. But Snoop didn't react. He just watched, letting Carlos expose all his arrogance. The truth was that Carlos was so immersed in his own perception of superiority that he didn't even bother to ask who this man was or why he was there. For Carlos, appearance was everything, and he felt in control of the situation. As Carlos continued to talk about the most suitable cars for him, Snoop Dogg asked simple questions, maintaining a calm tone of voice. He showed no haste or irritation. In fact, her calm seemed to confuse Carlos, who expected some reaction that would confirm his initial judgment. But none of that happened. Carlos began to feel uncomfortable, as if something was out of place, but his arrogance was too great to allow him to back down. "If you want to know, just to give you an idea, this car here costs more than many houses out there," Carlos said with a smile, pointing to the sports car. "We're talking about real luxury, you know? Only a select group of people can run something like this." He made a point of emphasizing these words, as if he was establishing a barrier between Snoop and the car. And as he said this, Carlos observed Snoop's clothes with an expression of clear disdain, almost as if he wanted him to give up right then and there. But Snoop didn't give up. He just smiled back and replied firmly, "So tell me, what do I need to do to test it?" This question was like a blow to Carlos, who blinked a few times before answering. Look, we don't release test drives to just anyone. Only approved customers, you know. Don't take it personally, it's just the rules. Carlos's response generated a slight murmur among the other employees and customers in the store, who were now starting to pay more attention to the interaction. Everyone could feel something was happening, but Carlos seemed oblivious to the growing tension. He continued to treat Snoop as if he were a nobody, while the rapper remained impassive, almost as if he was waiting for the right moment to act. Now tell me, how do you think Carlos will react when he finally realizes who is in front of him? Will he be able to maintain his arrogance until the end? Or will the truth tear down his mask and expose the lesson he so desperately needed to learn? Write here in the comments what you would do in Snoop's place and use the phrase, "never judge by appearance." I really want to know your opinion, because what comes next will surprise even the most attentive Carlos. With his arrogance written all over his face, seemed increasingly determined to prove to himself and to whoever was around that simple, silent man had no place there. He crossed his arms again, leaning slightly forward, as if he wanted to dominate the conversation. "Are you sure you're in the right place?" he said, with a sarcastic tone and a smile that seemed like an invitation to embarrassment. The other salespeople in the store, although they didn't have the courage to say anything, exchanged complicit glances, laughing discreetly as they watched the scene from afar. Snoop Dogg, however, showed no sign of irritation. He just maintained his calm posture, almost as if he was disarming Carlos without needing words. This seemed to bother the seller even more, who clearly expected some kind of reaction to reinforce his point of view. But instead, Snoop kept asking simple, direct questions, like someone who knew exactly what he wanted. "I'm interested in the most expensive car you have. Can you show me?" That sentence seemed to be a blow to Carlos's patience. He laughed openly, this time without even trying to hide his mocking tone. "The most expensive? This one?" He pointed to the sports car Snoop had been analyzing for a few minutes. "Look, I'm going to be honest with you. These models are for a very exclusive audience. They are tailor-made for people who can afford that level of luxury." He emphasized the word luxury, as if to make it clear that he believed Snoop had no chance of being among those people. "Maybe I can show you something more affordable," Carlos continued, as if he was being generous in suggesting an alternative. He pointed to a smaller, more discreet and infinitely cheaper model, which was strategically positioned next to the main showroom. "This one might be more your style, and the price, much more realistic." Other customers in the store, until then busy with their own choices, began to notice the atmosphere that was forming. There was something about the way Carlos handled the conversation that made it seem like he was having fun at Snoop's expense, like it was a private show meant to stroke his ego. Some curious glances turned to the scene, while the employees continued to laugh softly, already certain that Carlos was dealing with someone who, for them, was clearly out of place. Snoop stood his ground. He watched Carlos for a moment, with a look that seemed serene but carried something else, a kind of calculated patience, as if he was waiting for the right moment. "I'm not interested in smaller models," he replied calmly. "I already said I want the best car you have. What's the next step?" Carlos, now visibly irritated, made an exaggerated gesture with his hands, as if to say, "You don't understand." He gave a short laugh, shaking his head before responding, "The next step? Okay, the next step would be for you to make sure you can afford it. But I'll be honest, save your time and mine, because for a car of this level, we only deal with customers who demonstrate real purchasing conditions." It was clear that Carlos was deliberately pressuring Snoop to quit, trying to make him an example of someone who doesn't belong in an environment like that. But despite all the comments and disdainful looks, Snoop remained unshakable. He took a deep breath and asked again, this time with a discreet smile, "And how do you decide who has real conditions?" This question seemed to irritate Carlos even more, who now no longer hid his frustration. "Look," he began in an exasperated tone, "this kind of car is not something people buy without preparation. Serious clients come here knowing what they want, with documentation and a history that proves their ability to finance such an investment. It's not something for everyone, you know." He then lowered his tone, as if sharing a secret. "I suggest you look at the most basic models, and who knows, come back another day more prepared." As Carlos spoke, the tension in the room became increasingly evident. The salespeople's laughter had ceased, and the customers' curious gazes were now fixed on the scene. There was something different in the air, something no one could explain. It was as if everyone was waiting for a climax, for something that would completely change the dynamics of that interaction. "Okay, I understand," said Snoop, still smiling. He took a step back, observing the car once more. "But tell me, if I decide to pay in cash, will that solve the problem?" Carlos blinked a few times, surprised by the calmness of the question. For a brief moment he seemed to hesitate, but then he returned to his sarcastic smile. "Pay in cash? Right. And I'm the President of the United States," he said, with another laugh. "Come on, friend, let's be realistic. How about I show you something else within your range?" The murmurs among the customers grew louder, and now there was a mixture of curiosity and discomfort in the air. It was impossible to ignore the tension, but at the same time, no one wanted to miss the story unfolding. There was something about the man that made it seem like Carlos was about to make the biggest mistake of his life, but he didn't know it yet. "Now tell me, what would you do in Snoop Dogg's place? Will he let this arrogance pass, or teach Carlos the lesson he clearly deserves? I want to know your opinion here in the comments. Use the phrase, "respect is priceless," and say what you think should happen next. Because believe me, what comes now will change everything. Carlos seemed to be in complete control of the situation, at least. That's what he believed. For him, that man with the humble appearance and calm voice was no one important. He was just another curious person who had entered Grand Motors without understanding the level of exclusivity of that place. And Carlos, full of himself, was determined to end that interaction in the most humiliating way possible. After all, he thought he was just dealing with another invader in a space reserved for a select elite. The tension in the store was visible. Customers and other salespeople, who previously only exchanged glances and discreet smiles, were now clearly interested in the unfolding scene. Some even approached discreetly, pretending to watch the cars, but with their ears attentive to every word that came out of Carlos's mouth. It was impossible not to notice that something was about to happen. And Carlos, as if he wanted to further impress the audience that was now watching the scene, decided to cross the line. He took a step forward, closing the distance between himself and Snoop Dogg, and adopted an almost paternalistic tone, as if he was teaching a lesson to the man who, in his view, didn't understand where he was. "I've seen a lot of people come in here with big dreams, but to be honest, this isn't the place for dreamers," he said, a smug smile on his face. "Here, we serve real customers, people who know what they want and can pay for it. Do you understand what I mean?" The silence in the store was almost deafening. That comment, full of prejudice and arrogance, seemed to hang in the air like a bomb about to explode. Carlos looked around as if looking for approval in the eyes of his colleagues and continued, feeling increasingly confident. "I suggest you come back when you are more prepared. Maybe one day, who knows. But for now, I think you should look for something more on your level." Snoop Dogg remained absolutely calm. He took a deep breath with a small smile on his face, as if he was processing every word Carlos had said. There was something about his posture that was beginning to make the salesman uncomfortable. Maybe it was the fact that Snoop hadn't shown any signs of shame or anger, or maybe it was that calm, almost defiant look that seemed to say, "You have no idea what you're doing." But Carlos, trapped in his own arrogance, didn't stop there. He decided to deliver the final blow, something he believed would end the interaction once and for all, and reaffirm his position of authority in the store. "Look, honestly," he began now with an even more condescending tone of voice, "there's a fast food place right around the corner. Maybe you should have dinner there and forget about buying a car like this. It's not for everyone, you know. That sentence was the breaking point. The murmurs in the store increased. Some customers exchanged looks of shock, while others concealed smiles, perhaps because they thought Carlos was being brave in saying something so direct. But what no one knew, not even Carlos, was that the game was about to turn in a way that no one could have predicted. Snoop, still calm, finally broke the silence. He took a small step forward, now looking straight into Carlos's eyes. His voice, low but full of weight, cut the air like a blade. "Do you always treat your customers like this?" he asked, with a tone that mixed genuine curiosity and a slight touch of irony. Carlos hesitated for a moment, surprised by the question. He laughed nervously, trying to maintain his posture. "I treat everyone based on who they appear to be," he replied, as if justifying himself. Snoop tilted his head slightly, still keeping that look that seemed to pierce through Carlos. "Interesting," he said, with a small smile, "because so far, all you've shown is disrespect." The entire store seemed to freeze at that moment. The calmness with which Snoop had responded seemed to carry far greater weight than any angry outburst or direct confrontation. Carlos tried to react, but he seemed confused, not knowing exactly how to respond to that role reversal. For the first time, he seemed to have no control over the situation. And then, Snoop Dogg did something no one expected. He reached into his sweatshirt pocket and pulled out a shiny black card, a card that, to the few who recognized it, was symbolic of a level of exclusivity and wealth that Carlos had never even imagined. He held it for a few seconds, turning it lightly between his fingers, before placing it on the nearest table. "That's my credit limit," he said calmly, looking directly at Carlos. "Do you think you can afford the car?" The silence that followed was even deeper than before. Carlos remained completely still, his eyes fixed on the card, as if trying to process what was happening. The store manager, who had stayed in the background until that point, finally noticed something was out of the ordinary and began approaching, worried. Other customers, now unable to hide it, looked at Snoop with a mixture of surprise and curiosity. Carlos tried to say something, but the words didn't seem to come out. He opened his mouth, closed it again, and then looked at the manager, as if waiting for someone to come and save him from this situation. But nobody said anything. The tension in the air was almost palpable. Everyone in the store knew something much bigger was about to happen. And now I want to know, what would you do in Snoop Dogg's place? Would you leave it at that, or would you show exactly who you are? Comment below using the phrase "the truth always appears" and share your opinion. Because what comes next in this story will leave you speechless. Carlos remained standing still, his eyes fixed on the black card that Snoop Dogg had placed on the table. It was as if, suddenly, the entire world around him had stopped. The arrogance and contempt he displayed minutes before seemed to have evaporated, leaving an absolute emptiness in its place. He opened his mouth to say something, but nothing came out. The silence in the store was so profound that it was possible to hear the sound of ambient music in the background, something that no one had noticed until then. Meanwhile, Snoop Dogg remained motionless, with the same calm and confident posture. He didn't need to get excited because he knew that moment spoke for itself. Every second that passed seemed to weigh tons on Carlos, who now began to realize that he had made the biggest mistake of his life. His eyes went from the card to Snoop, and for a brief moment, he tried to hide his confusion. "Yeah, well, I guess we can check, of course," he stammered, trying to regain some sense of control, but his voice no longer had the same tone of superiority as before. The manager, who had been observing the scene from afar, finally realized that something out of the ordinary was happening. He approached quickly, a nervous smile on his face. "Sir, can I help you?" he asked, trying to sound professional. But when his eyes fell on the black card, his expression completely changed. He knew exactly what it meant. It wasn't just a symbol of wealth. It was a card that represented status and a level of exclusivity that few in the world could achieve. "Oh, don't worry," Snoop replied with a slight smile as he crossed his arms. "I was already being very well taken care of by your colleague here." He looked straight at Carlos, who now looked small and lost. The manager, trying to contain his nervousness, turned to Carlos and asked, "Did you know you were dealing with Before he could finish the sentence, Carlos interrupted him. Of course, I was just showing you the most unique options," he said, forcing a smile that looked more like a mask. The tension in the air was almost palpable. All the customers and employees in the store were now completely focused on the scene. It was impossible not to notice the complete change in the dynamics of the situation. Carlos, who moments before displayed a haughty and arrogant posture, now looked like a reprimanded student in front of the principal. Meanwhile, Snoop Dogg maintained his almost supernatural calm, as if he was directing every moment of it unfolding. "So can I test it now?" asked Snoop, casually pointing to the sports car that had caught his eye from the start. The manager, still trying to save the store's reputation, quickly responded, "Of course, sir, absolutely, I will arrange that right now." He shot a death glare at Carlos, who, not knowing what to do, just nodded frantically. The silence began to be broken by murmurs among the customers in the store. Some recognized Snoop Dogg now, while others just stared in shock at the scene unfolding before them. "Did you see that?" whispered a man to his wife. "It's Snoop Dogg. He can buy this whole store if he wants." The comment did not go unnoticed by Carlos, who now seemed to sink more with each word he heard. While the manager arranged the test drive, Snoop Dogg slowly walked to the car, observing it carefully. He knew all eyes were on him, but he didn't let that change his stance. He opened the car door and sat down on the impeccable leather seat, calmly adjusting the steering wheel. As he did so, he looked at Carlos and asked, with a smile on his face, "So, what did you think? Does it look like it's within my reach now?" Carlos, not knowing how to respond, just shook his head in silence, his face red with embarrassment. He knew there was no way to repair the damage he had caused. Every word he had said before now seemed to echo around the store as a reminder of his arrogance and snap judgment. The test drive was brief, but long enough for Snoop Dogg to confirm his decision. He returned to the store, still as calm as he had been since the beginning, and addressed the manager. "I'll take it," he said, with the naturalness of someone buying something at the supermarket. "In plain sight, as I said before." The impact of those words was like an earthquake for Carlos. He looked at the manager, then at Snoop, and finally at the car. It was impossible for him to fully process what was happening. As the manager rushed to finish the paperwork, Snoop looked at Carlos one last time. "You know I don't usually care how people treat me," he said, with a tone that seemed more reflective than confrontational. "But what happened here today made me think. Maybe you should rethink the way you judge people. Not everything is what it seems." Carlos couldn't respond. He just stood there while Snoop Dogg finished his purchase and left the store driving the most expensive car they had. The silence that fell in the store after his departure was almost as heavy as what had been before. Carlos knew that moment would be remembered by everyone, not as a lesson for Snoop, but as a lesson for himself. Now tell me, what do you think was going through Carlos's head at that moment? If it were you in Snoop's shoes, what would you say to him? Leave your comment below and use the phrase, "Respect is for everyone." I'm curious to know your opinion, because what happened here is just the beginning of a greater reflection on humility and prejudice. What did Carlos really learn from this experience? Let's find out together. As Snoop Dogg calmly drove out of the store in the most expensive car they had offered, the silence inside the dealership was deafening. Everyone was still processing what they had just witnessed. Carlos, standing next to his desk, seemed to be frozen, staring into space. His face reflected a mixture of shame, regret, and disbelief. He was probably wondering how he had let his arrogance blind him to the point of humiliating someone who ultimately proved to be so much more than he could ever imagine. The other salespeople, who had previously laughed and exchanged condescending looks, now looked at Carlos with completely different expressions. They knew that what had happened here was not just a simple mistake, it was a clear, almost cinematic lesson in the consequences of judging people by their appearance. And, most importantly, it was a lesson in how respect should be universal, regardless of who is in front of you. But the story wasn't over yet. A few minutes after leaving the car, Snoop Dogg returned to the store. He parked the vehicle at the entrance, got out as calmly as before and entered the dealership, now with everyone's eyes fixed on him. The atmosphere was charged with expectation. No one knew what he was going to say or do. The manager immediately rushed over to greet him, nervous, perhaps fearing that something still needed to be resolved. But Snoop Dogg raised his hand, signaling that he wanted to speak directly to Carlos. Carlos, who still looked like a ghost of himself, looked at Snoop with wide eyes, not knowing what to expect. The rapper slowly approached, stopped in front of him, and with a calm smile said, "I could leave here and just forget about what happened today, but I'm not going to do that." He paused, letting the tension in the air build, because what happened here today is not just about me. It's about how you choose to treat people. And I think you need to hear that. Carlos tried to say something, but Snoop raised his hand again, indicating that he wasn't finished yet. You never know who is in front of you, what they have been through or what they mean to the world. You saw me walk in with a hoodie on and thought you knew everything about me. He decided I wasn't important enough for his time or respect. But the truth is that respect shouldn't just be given to those who can afford a car like this. It must be given to everyone, always. Snoop's words weren't aggressive. He spoke with a calmness that seemed to amplify every message he conveyed. Everyone in the store was completely paralyzed, absorbing each sentence as if it were direct shots into their conscience. And at that moment, Snoop Dogg wasn't just a celebrity teaching a lesson. He was someone who had experienced it firsthand and who knew the impact his words could have. I bought this car today, not because I wanted to prove something, he continued. I bought it because I wanted you, and anyone else watching, to understand that humility and respect are the true riches. Money buys a car, but character builds relationships. Remember this next time you decide to judge someone. Carlos, with teary eyes, couldn't say anything. He just nodded slowly, as if he finally understood the weight of what he had done. The surrounding customers, who had previously been merely curious, now seemed visibly impacted. The manager, trying to save the situation, started to speak, but Snoop gently interrupted him. No need to worry. I didn't come here to harm your store. I came to remember that everyone deserves respect. If you learned this, then it was worth it. With that, Snoop Dogg turned towards the door, but before leaving he stopped and looked back once more. And Carlos, he said, with a slight smile on his face, I hope you remember this day, not because of the car I bought, but because of what he taught you. He then left, leaving the store in almost reverent silence. The final scene of that story was not about wealth or revenge. It was about something bigger. It was about the power of respect, about how the way we treat others can say more about us than anything else. It was a demonstration that true greatness is not in humiliating or underestimating others, but in being humble, even when you are at the top. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever been through something similar? Have you ever been judged by your appearance or treated unfairly? If so, share your story in the comments and use the phrase, "Respect is the basis of everything." Let's turn this experience into a collective reflection, because stories like this remind us that we all have something to learn. And if this story impacted you, don't forget to leave a like so that more people can hear this powerful message. Subscribe to the channel and activate the bell to follow other stories that will inspire you, move you, and, who knows, change the way you see the world. In the next video, we'll talk about how small actions can bring big lessons. Stay tuned, because the best is yet to come. If you followed this story until the end, know that you have just witnessed more than a simple story of poetic revenge. You have seen how respect can transform situations and teach lessons that last a lifetime. Now, I want to make a special request of you. Show that you are here, that this message has reached you. Leave a comment right now with the phrase, "Respect is worth more than luxury," and be part of this community that believes in the power of humility, justice, and reflection. Your voice is important, and we really want to know what you think of this story. And don't forget, if you like this video and want more stories like this, click on the subscribe button right now and activate the bell. Here on the channel, we bring exciting, inspiring stories full of twists and turns that will surprise you and make you reflect. And if you've made it this far, leave a like, because this helps us take these messages to even more people. Oh, and before you leave, click on the next video that appears on the screen. It brings another incredible story of overcoming injustice, one of those you can't miss. Trust me, this next story will move you as much as this one. I'll see you there.